Hello everybody, my name is Jerry Hartsock with Cutting Edge Consulting and Research Services. Today we're conducting a little bit of a field experiment here. We're looking at stand establishment in corn. And what we got in front of us today is the reality this year of corn-on-corn production in a lot of production systems. When we come in and look at stands of corn, we're looking at numerous things, not just the population of a given field. Okay. So we come in and do a population check. In this case, we did 1/1000th of an acre. But once we do that 1/1000th of an acre count, we then come back and do a stand evaluation as well as to the quality of the stand. So we're looking at stand quality and stand quantity. The joint things together is what really matters in corn production. So as you look down through here, we measured off 1/1000th of an acre, and then we come back through and put a flag to the adjoining production that each plant is going to have. Each plant produces different amounts of grain in the field. Some are going to be full producers, and we call them orange flags or full producers or standards. And then the white flags in this scenario are delayed emergers. They could be a little bit delayed and be a leaf behind, or more delayed and be 2 or 3 leaves behind. Anything more than 3 leaves behind tends to not produce grain in a cornfield. The yellow flags is a skip or a gap for whatever reason came on. If there's a blue flag in the run, that's where 2 seeds were dropped. A multiple seed drop is a blue flag. So we got orange flags, full producers in our mind, white flags, which are delayed emergers. They're a little bit behind or somewhat behind, and they're going to have a partial ear on them, either somewhere between 25% to 75% of an ear, depending on some things. The yellow ones, the skips or the gaps, are not going to be non-producers. So from this 35,000 final population, we've deemed there's going to be about 26 or 27,000 ears, full ears produced out of this, with about 20,000 full ears and about 8 or 9 or 10 partial ears that's going to come out of this stand of corn. This cornfield was planted around April 16th or 17th. What prefaced or led up to this stand of corn was this is continuous corn, obviously. And this is kind of the reality that exists this year in continuous corn. This was fall chisel plowed last year. This was early harvested last September, fall chisel plowed right after that. Anhydrous ammonia was applied last fall. We came back in this spring with a soil finisher, and that soil was very mellow already, and we worked that ground down to a depth of about 3 or 4 inches. That tillage pass right there in this field here is probably the precursor to a lot of our issues. This soil was so mellow, it left that soil kind of loose and fluffy. And some of these gaps or skips and delayed emergers are the result of that seed to soil contact not being quite right. Also, the moisture content. We believe we lost some moisture content, and there was partial moisture that seed imbibed to get started, and in some cases it lost that moisture supply. And the precursor to almost all those problems is residue in the trench. Residue in the trench is our biggest nemesis here, because that residue next to that seed changed the way it imbibed water or take it in water. If there was residue next to that seed, it did not take that water at the rate it should have. Also, if we had a rain, it also keeps that wetter longer as well sometimes. And in drier times, it will wick that moisture away, and also can affect temperature. It's also known that it's usually colder where there's residue by that seed versus not. So seed depth was a little bit of an issue here, but as this was driven about 5 miles an hour with floating row cleaners, but that wasn't quite enough in this scenario. We probably should have made an adjustment in this scenario down to somewhere between 4 and 4.2 miles an hour would have been a nice adjustment here, knowing what we know now. The 2020 monitor was telling us that we were probably on the upper end of the range that we should have been planting. The 2020 monitor probably would have said more like 4.2 would have given us a little better ride and a little better seed to soil contact and led to more producing plants out here. We're going to dig in some of these areas here. You'll see the residue that still exists in the trench that was part of the culprit that led to some of these delayed emergers and skips or gaps in this profile. It's those pieces of corn residue right there that were down to the depth of the seed. The biggest craze that's going on right now, whatever, is doing vertical tillage. And vertical tillage, even corn-on-corn production, trying to not let this residue go where seed's going to go. So the goal is the seed should be placed below the residue, or the residue should all be kept above the seed. And that's the goal here. No residue in that trench like we can obtain in soybean fields. If we're planting just off the old soybean row, there should be no residue in that trench if we're doing no tillage or vertical tillage. That field cultivator or soil finisher is a nemesis, I believe, in a stand establishment in all crops, as it puts residue down where you don't want it, which is somewhere between 2 and 2.5 inches where we should be placing our seeds. But that residue in that trench, and again right there, as I dig up these old corn residues, that was our nemesis of not having the best seed to soil contact and it wicking away moisture. Those two things there, I believe, led to most of the off types here, or less production of ears on each individual plant. If you notice here, full producer. That one's 1 leaf behind. This one here is 2 or 3 leaves behind. Back to a full producer, a greatly reduced yield plant. Full yield, 3/4 of an ear, full ear, and so forth. Coming down the line, 2 skips or gaps. What typically happens when that planter is going, it tends to have really good runs and then it has hiccups. A really good run and then a hiccup for whatever reason, whether it hits an old root ball or something else. But it tends to have good runs where there's a lot of full producing plants and then it has hiccups for a while. If you look here, it's a start of another good run. A lot of orange flags, no anomalies. This was a problem area for whatever reason. It takes very little time to travel that distance. By the time that corn planter came, if it hit an old root ball, by the time it hits it and goes over and restabilized, we've dropped 7 seeds off target. So combine that across this field of hitting pieces of residue or clods, you can see how precise it has to be for everything to come up over a short amount of time. Once things starts to emerge, you want them to come up over a 24 to 36 hour period, let's say, once they start to emerge. That's where the full producers usually come from. So again, skip or a gap, probably residue in the trench or something else. And obviously no bag of seed is perfect. There's always some imperfections in a bag of seed. So even if it has a 98 warm germ and a 95 cold germ, there still is the potential for a few seeds to not germinate or not make it to harvest on some things. So between that and the planter, or more importantly, the planter setup with preparatory tillage, I believe that preparatory tillage pass is what's taking us backwards more than anything else, by using sweeps or shovels on that tool. Where the true vertical tillage tools, and there's really only a couple of true vertical tillage tools, the Great Plains Turbo Till is one of those, the Kraus Accelerator, the Salford, are some of the very few real vertical tillage tools that exist out there, because some of the others are actually doing horizontal tillage, more so on a disc frame and doing too much tillage in some cases. So if you notice here, there's no doubles in this row. Metering was not the problem here. It was spacing, it was depth control. Because this environment and seed to soil contact was probably our precursor. This thing was metering single seeds all the way along. And we probably dropped closer to 38,000. This field is variable rate planted. So in this A zone right here, we tend to be dropping 37.5 or somewhere around there. And we got a 35,000 final, and that should be good news. But the bad news is we're only going to produce probably 27 or so thousand full ears out of this, with 20,000 full ears and about 9 or 10 partial ears out there, equating to the other part of that formula to determine yield. I still believe this field is going to do very, very well. This field has a history of top end production. And with a little bit of luck, This thing is very well fed with starter fertilizer and 3 forms of nitrogen that we promote here on some things. But better accuracy at planting time would have made a big difference on yield. My guess is we could have improved yield by 30 or 40 bushel by making some tweaks of backing off by 1 mile an hour on planting and doing a different preparatory tillage and leaving it more firm and less residue in the trench. Okay, tools of the trade. I suggest when you come out here, I always come equipped with my handy dandy bucket on some things. At this time of year, a trowel, a knife, and a seed finder are some really good tools to have out there. Obviously the flags, a variety of tape measures depending on what I come across. Insects. I'm also finding a bevy of insects out there, not in this field. This field is a rootworm protected corn. It's a quad stack with granular insecticide as well. In this scenario, if without those things in place, I could have black cutworm issues like I have in lots of places. Hearing some other things on some Pythium and seedling disease blights as well. We seem to have none of that as I can look here today. So delayed emergers and some gaps in the row are the biggest problems here as I see today of leaving bushels on the table in this production scenario. We're gonna go venture down the road a ways. We happen to be here in outside of Geneseo, Illinois, in Henry County, Illinois, and we're gonna venture over towards the Rock Island County line and look at a field over there that's continuous corn with vertical tillage only. And then we're gonna venture over a little farther over again and look at a field that's soybean stubble that was vertical tilled and or no tilled to look to see what a firm seed bed meant for planting accuracy this year. The firmer, the better. The slower they planted, the better as well. So the answer this year was firm and slow. Slow this year was somewhere between 3.8 and 4.5 miles an hour. Firm meant firm, not that loose like a field cultivator or soil finisher does.